There is a specific kind of internal friction that you probably haven't found a word for yet. It's the feeling of being a bilingual of the soul, someone who speaks the language of a slow, physical world but lives every day in a fast and visible one. If you were born in that narrow window between the late 70s and the mid-80s, you aren't just a bridge between generations. You are something much more complex. You are the last group of human beings who will ever know what it feels like to be completely, unreachably alone with your own thoughts. Think about the texture of your earliest memories. They likely have a weight to them. You remember the physical resistance of a rotary dial, the specific smell of a library card catalog, or the way you had to physically commit to a plan days in advance because there was no way to update it once you left the house. In that world, boredom wasn't an emergency to be solved. It was a space where your imagination actually grew. You had a private self that wasn't being tracked, measured, or uploaded. You were allowed to be messy, to be quiet, and most importantly, to be unfinished. Then, right as your identity was beginning to set, somewhere between your first heartbreak and your first real job, the lights changed. The world didn't just get faster, it became transparent. Suddenly, the version of you that existed in the physical room had to compete with a version of you that existed on a screen. You were young enough to adapt, to learn the code, and to thrive in the digital rush. But because you remember the before, you carry a psychological phantom limb that younger generations don't have. You have a constant, quiet craving for a type of presence that the modern world has essentially made impossible. Psychologically, this creates a unique state of identity fragmentation. You are old enough to value the deep, focused monotasking of the analog era, yet you are proficient in the frantic multitasking of the digital one. This isn't just a matter of being tech-savvy, it's a deep-seated tension in how you process reality. You often find yourself looking at your phone with a sense of duty rather than delight, feeling the pull of the infinite scroll, while a deeper, older part of your brain is screaming for the finish line, for the end of the chapter, the end of the tape, the moment where the world finally stops asking for your attention. This is the hidden cost of being a final witness. You are the only people who can truly compare two entirely different ways of being human, and that comparison often manifests as a heavy, unexplained exhaustion. It's the tiredness of someone who is constantly translating their own life from one language to another. You are performing the digital self while still inhabiting an analog heart. And the friction between those two states is where your specific brand of burnout lives. Think about the architecture of your early connections. They were bound by walls and wires. When you were with someone, you were fully there, because there was quite literally nowhere else to be. Your presence wasn't a choice you had to actively make against 1,000 notifications. It was simply the default state of being alive. Because of this, your earliest friendships were built on a foundation of unrecorded time. You had hours of conversation that vanished into the air the moment they were spoken. There was a safety in that, a psychological freedom to test out ideas, to be wrong, to be awkward, and to grow out of those versions of yourself without a digital paper trail holding you to who you were at 17. But as you moved into adulthood, that foundation shifted. You are now expected to maintain an ambient awareness of everyone you've ever met. The casual acquaintances from a summer job 20 years ago, the distant cousins, the former colleagues, they all occupy a permanent space in your peripheral vision. Psychologists have noted that this level of social density is historically unprecedented. For someone raised with the clean breaks of the analog world, this creates a specific kind of low-grade cognitive dissonance. You find yourself exhausted by the performance of staying in touch, not because you don't care, but because your brain still associates social connection with deep, singular focus. You are trying to apply a high-resolution way of caring to a low-resolution digital landscape, and the math never quite adds up. This leads to a phenomenon you might recognize in your own life: the social retreat. It's that sudden, intense need to go completely dark, to put the phone in another room, to ignore the mounting red bubbles on your screen, and to simply exist in a space where no one is looking at you. It isn't just introversion, it's a survival mechanism. It is your analog self trying to reclaim the privacy it needs to actually process its own emotions. Because you remember what it feels like to be unobserved, the constant witnessing of modern life feels like a weight. You are hyper-aware of the camera even when it isn't there, leading to a subtle, constant editing of your own joy before you've even finished feeling it. You also likely carry a specific kind of archive anxiety. Since you lived through the transition from physical objects to digital files, you understand, perhaps better than anyone, how fragile information really is. You've seen floppy disks become obsolete, CDs get scratched into silence, and MySpace pages vanish into the ether. This makes you a digital hoarder of a very specific kind. You keep the old hard drives, the backups of backups, and the shoeboxes of printed photos because you don't fully trust the cloud. You know that forever is a marketing term, not a technical reality. This makes your relationship with your own history feel precarious. You are caught between the desire to document everything so it isn't lost and the deep, inherited knowledge that the best parts of life are the ones that can't be saved. This duality often shows up in your professional life as a strange kind of competence guilt. You are likely the person who can still figure out how to fix a physical machine while simultaneously managing a complex digital workflow. But because you can see both sides of the seam, you often end up doing the emotional heavy lifting for those who can't. You find yourself explaining the nuance of a face-to-face conversation to a younger colleague who prefers a Slack message, while explaining the efficiency of a new software to an older one who misses the paper trail. You aren't just a bridge, you are a buffer. You are absorbing the friction of a world that is still trying to decide what it wants to be. This constant mediation, this being the buffer between two eras, often leads to a quiet, persistent sense of temporal homesickness. You aren't homesick for a place, but for a rhythm. You miss the way a day used to unfold before it was chopped into 30-second increments. You miss the version of yourself that could sit on a porch or a park bench for an hour without the phantom vibration of a pocket-sized supercomputer demanding your attention. This isn't just nostalgia, it's a biological protest. Your nervous system was calibrated in a world of physical limits, and you are now trying to run it on a circuit of infinite inputs. But here is where the perspective shifts. Because you live in the seam between these two worlds, you possess a specific kind of psychological depth that is increasingly rare. You have the ability to double-read reality. When you look at a digital interaction, you can still see the human vulnerability behind the screen. When you encounter a technical failure, you don't panic because you remember when things were offline by default. You have a built-in BS detector that comes from having seen how things used to be built, sold, and experienced before the algorithms took over. Your exhaustion is actually evidence of your value. The reason you feel the friction so intensely is because you refuse to let go of either side. You are holding on to the human nuance of the past while navigating the efficiency of the future. That makes you the curator of a specific frequency of human existence. You are the ones who can tell the next generation what it felt like to be bored enough to dream. You are the ones who can tell the previous generation how to speak to a world that no longer uses paper. If you felt like an outsider in both the world you came from and the world you live in now, perhaps it's because you were never meant to fully belong to either. You were meant to be the witness. You are the keeper of the transition. The fact that you remember the silence of a house before the internet, the weight of a physical letter, and the freedom of being unreachable isn't a burden to be carried in secret. It is a baseline, a psychological anchor that allows you to move through the noise of today without being completely swallowed by it. So the next time you feel that urge to step away, to close the laptop and simply sit in the quiet for a moment, don't view it as a failure to keep up. View it as a return to your native language. You aren't falling behind. You are reconnecting with the part of you that knows who you are when no one is watching. That part of you is still there, beneath the layers of digital noise and professional expectations. It's the version of you that doesn't need to be processed or uploaded to be real. In a world that is constantly changing, your ability to remember what stays the same is your greatest strength. You aren't just a bridge between generations. You are the evidence that human depth survives the shift.